I was definitely concerned when I was applying that my GPA would maybe raise some red flags, but ultimately. Hello guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Georgia K. I am a first year history PhD at Brown, and in today's video I wanted to talk about how I got into Brown, my application process, and basically tips and tricks for especially first generation students of color like me who have no idea how to go about this application process, especially for competitive programs. So yeah, so if you want to hear how I got into Brown, which obviously, disclaimer, I was not on an admission committee, so I can't say for sure, but I can just talk about the things that I did differently in my application and how I think that might have helped my application so that I could get into competitive schools like Brown and Penn and other schools like that. So if you want to see more, keep watching. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is just like a little introduction about my educational background. I'll go into stats and I'll also give, I'll insert my reaction at the end to actually when I got my Brown acceptance and maybe a little bit of a story time. But yeah, I'm going to talk about my background, then I'm going to talk about what I did before my application, and then my reaction to getting in. First thing is definitely, when I started undergrad, I was not like the top student. Like, I was basically on the lower end of the scale. Like, I got into a few schools and I was really happy with the school that I ended up going to, which is amazing, which is Agnes Scott. And I got a lot of great support there, but I was not like a 4.0 student by any means. So I think the biggest things that I did in undergrad were really, I did an internship almost every single semester, and that really helped me to clarify what I wanted to study, what I liked, and it also made me sure that I wanted to get a PhD, which I think having that certain level of, for a fact because you've been in the field, helps a lot in your graduate application. I also did a lot of classes that were research focused, and I'm going to do a whole different video on how to get research experience if you are a humanities or social science student. But I did a lot of courses that I knew specifically were going to end with like research projects, and I talked to my professors about my interest in graduate school and how I could tailor those research projects to potentially getting into a program once I decided that is what I wanted to do. And then another thing is that, as I said, for my grades, I'll go into my stats, but my GPA was a 3.5, nothing crazy. Obviously not a bad GPA, but especially for humanities, social science students, like often like people have like a 4.0 or something crazy, like a perfect GPA. And I was definitely concerned when I was applying that my GPA would maybe raise some red flags, but ultimately I was like, you know what, the reason I know why my GPA wasn't perfect was because I was working the entire time, and I was also doing an internship every single semester, and I had all this amazing experience that I really thought would make me a good candidate, even though I didn't have like a perfect GPA by any means. No, my history GPA was much higher. It was almost a 4.0, so that helped a lot, I think, because it showed that I had like really good an academic track record in history. And so it balances, but I would definitely say don't focus too much. I mean, people say this all the time when they're talking about especially getting into like Ivy League programs and things like that. Don't focus too much on your GPA. Obviously, like a lot of the schools I ended up applying to had a 3.5 minimum, so having a 3.5 helped because I was barely able to like skate by in a few of my PhD applications. But try your hardest to get a decent GPA, and the rest will just have to work itself out. I do think having a lot of like work experience in the field, like specifically the field that you want, or research experience, both will help you a lot in your application process. So yeah, so just a summary of my undergrad experience was that I was an okay student, but I was very involved in getting and proactive in getting internships and getting experience and working in clubs. I also started a history club at my school. I think that helped a lot, and we ended up working with a lot of like small organizations, and I had a lot of good leadership experience in that. So I just think I showed like a commitment to the type of work that I wanted to do, and obviously that would help. Now, as I said, I was going to talk about my stats. So I mentioned previously that my GPA was a 3.5, my history GPA was much higher, but I ended up not doing the GRE, which I know is somewhat of a controversial choice. When I decided to do it, A lot of people told me that, oh, you want to do it just in case, because a lot of the schools that I applied to ended up getting rid of their GRE requirements. So I was like, thank God I didn't want to do it. And I was planning to do it. And then a lot of just things happened during COVID and my life went into disarray. And I was like, okay, I don't think this is going to work out. So I'm going to take a chance and not apply with a GRE score for any of my schools. So I can't talk about the GRE. I did do GRE prep, but I didn't do the GRE to submit to schools. So I would say if you're currently in the process of deciding GRE, no GRE, especially for PhD programs, some programs are more flexible, but for humanities and social science, I'm seeing a trend of people not really looking at the GRE anymore. So if you want comfort in choosing not to do it, just know that I, against everyone's best advice, chose not to do it, and it worked out for me. So that's all I can say. So yeah, so that was my GRE that I didn't do, and my GPA. And as for like my transcript, specific classes that I think helped, as I said, I did a lot of research classes, and some of the classes that I did were specifically, I did a senior thesis, and my senior thesis ended up being my writing sample, and my senior thesis was very, very long, and I ended up having to chop it up to submit to schools. But I really did that with in mind of graduate school, and I knew that I wanted to do original research and specifically archival research. So I did really in-depth archival research, and I was able to submit a really original writing sample to all my schools. And I will say, based on the people I've talked to, professors that I talked to, when I did apply and got feedback, a lot of people did say my writing sample was one of the biggest parts that sort of like showed up a lot in my application, and that people really enjoyed, was how I approached my research and really tackling a topic that isn't as prevalent. And I was also working in an archive that was my school's archive, which isn't like a typical archive, so it wouldn't be like I'm working with sources that other people have really looked at. And I do think some sort of originality in your application helps a whole lot. So yeah, so I feel like that was pretty generic, but just getting that stuff out of the way. Now I'm going to talk about my application timeline and specific things that I did, choices that I made that I think helped me to get into a few of the schools that I wanted to. So I decided that I wanted to get a PhD after my sophomore year internship, where I worked at a museum with a curator, and I talked to a lot of people in the history field, especially public history, and I sort of got an idea that, oh, like if I want to do something like this, or if I want to do a lot of research, then maybe a PhD might be the right path for me. And once that was a decision that I made, I was like, okay, I'm gonna head on and find out how to do this, because I sort of felt like I missed a lot of guidance when I was applying to undergrad. Like I just sort of did it by myself, like shot in the dark, and it worked out in the end, but I knew that there were so many things that I probably didn't do that would have helped my application. So this time I was dedicated to doing that. So I would say tip number one is to reach out to people. And I know, especially for us introverts, it's so hard, but I ended up reaching out to so many people, and that sort of got me on the path that I think made the biggest difference in my application. So I reached out to people on this platform called Cohort Sistas, which is a platform for Black women pursuing doctoral degrees. And I was just like hitting people up like, hey, like I am interested in potentially getting a PhD, and what is like people at schools that I knew that I was interested in, like just for general advice. Like I wasn't even asking for too much. I wasn't really asking for like meetings with people. I was just like, hey, like if you have any advice, like quickly, you know, nothing crazy, just like tell me what you wish you would have known when you were applying to undergrad. And a lot of people took it really seriously, and they gave me really thoughtful advice, and I would say that helped so much, because what someone ended up telling me ended up sort of like impacting the trajectory of my graduate application. So I talked to someone who told me about IRT, which is the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers. And IRT is essentially a grad prep program. If you're familiar with programs like McNair, which would be like the STEM equivalent, IRT just helps with like funding for applying to programs, because it's not cheap. Also just giving mentorship. So we had like grad advisors, current students to talk to. We also did a lot of webinars, and it was just really, really helpful as a community for a person who had no other people in my life, like immediate family, to ask these questions. Like that was invaluable. So I would say after I sort of like sent out feelers, I did it on Cohort Sistas, I did it on LinkedIn, and I also reached out to like my actual community in college. So I talked to my professors and I was like telling them like, I think I want to do this. What do I need to know basically if this is something I want to do in the next few years? And so because of everyone's just like pouring into me and giving me all this great advice, I was able to then sort of like from sophomore year apply to IRT. And I'm going to have a whole separate video on IRT, which should be coming out next week, and the application process, which was super competitive, but I ended up getting it, and getting it meant that I got support for sending in my application, so I didn't have to pay anything to do like almost 9 grad applications. And then also I got like a grad advisor who I would meet with weekly to sort of like talk about my grad school progress and have someone who's accountable to say, hey, like, did you do that draft of your statement of purpose? Hey, did you email that professor? Whatever. So honestly, 1, reach out to people. 2, make sure that you start early. So I feel like having started my junior year, because I applied to IRT at 20 years old, my junior year of college, and then ended up starting the program at 21 when I was applying, and ended up getting into Brown at 21 years old. So after doing all of that, like basically just talking to anybody that I could about my grad application process, I was able to get into IRT, and IRT was able to like really pour into me and give me a lot of advice about things that I didn't even know, like reaching out to professors, or you know, like doing multiple drafts of your statement of purpose. Like I feel like that's probably the biggest thing that I learned, was just how much your statement of purpose mattered. Because for me, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write a good one, and obviously I thought it was important, but I ended up spending almost 5 months doing like bi-weekly drafts of my statement of purpose. So by the time I finished, it was like this pristine, like honestly my best writing. And that's what you want. Like that's what you want for graduate school. You want that work to be so polished, so thorough, that no one can say like, oh, she didn't put any effort into this. Like everyone should know, like, you did that thing, you put a lot of effort into it. So it was a lot of effort. It was a 2-year process, and I think that is one of the reasons why I got into Brown. So now that it actually is time to apply, I've done IRT, I'm going through the process, and I applied to 9 schools. I do a lot of research into the schools that I want to apply to, and I was very selective. Like it's very easy when you're applying to just apply to schools that are very reputable, and you know that people are gonna know those names instantly. And obviously that's okay to a certain extent, but you really do want to make sure, for the sake of the strength of your application, that you're applying to a school where you can legitimately say, X and X at your school will help me succeed, and in helping me succeed, I will make future contributions to X field. And that's really what your application is about. It's saying that your school is going to help me to make a difference. And so I ended up applying to 9 schools, and so it took a lot of work. It was a lot of intense research on those schools to figure out like specific people, specific like opportunities at that school that I could use, so that I could put that into my statement of purpose. And if you want to like hear more about my statement of purpose, I really don't know if that's as interesting to people, but if anyone wants to know, I can also make a video on that. But yeah, so I ended up doing that for all my statement of purpose. I ended up individualizing every single application, as in like making sure that I was talking about the professors I wanted to work with, different departments, workshops, like lots of research. And I took the entire summer before my senior year to do research on these schools. And I also reached out to their different admissions committees, not admissions committees. I also reached out to all their different admission counselors. So like the diversity people and the graduate schools. I'd reach out to their reps and talk to them. And I think that's also a big tip, is to reach out to the schools early, like not just professors, but obviously from what I was saying, reach out to professors, but also reach out to like this admin staff, because they'll be able to help you as well. So just make sure you have all your bases covered with reaching out to people. So I put my 20-page research paper together, which was my senior thesis. I submitted that as my writing sample, and I submitted my application 2 weeks early. Now, another thing I will say for Brown is that they have a preview day, and that's usually in the fall. I ended up applying to their preview day and getting in, so I was able to talk to the graduate school of admissions, and I was able to talk to a few professors I was interested in working with. So again, I feel like that definitely helped. I don't think it's a guarantee that you'll get in, because I know people who also did that day and didn't get in, but I feel like it's a combination of things. So one, I was already in talks with the grad admissions folks in like their different grad offices, and then two, once I did that program, I was really intentional about the sort of questions I wanted to ask, and I had already done a lot of like research beforehand, so it wasn't like I was sort of like stunned and not knowing what to say or whatever. So combination of things, but I did that program, and I definitely think it might have helped a little bit, but I don't think if you get in it's a guarantee. But definitely if you're interested in Brown or other schools like Brown, you should look out if they have any sort of days where you can sort of like talk to professors. It usually involves a short application, but I personally think the short application is a good chance for you to, one, finish your application materials, but two, you can get sort of like feedback, because if you don't get into any of the preview days, you're like, okay, maybe I need to fix this stuff. But if you do get into some like I did, you're like, okay, I might be on the right track in how I'm framing my application. So I talked about my research interest, which was essentially looking at Black women's labor in the 20th century and really situating them within a feminist context. My research has evolved since I've been at Brown, so I will say that what I wrote about isn't exactly what I'm doing now. I'll talk about that in a future vlog, but at least I sort of had an idea. I'm still stuck on race, labor, and gender, and I knew that's what I would harp on. I was like, these are the three intersections that I want to look at, and I still want to look at those, but my question has sort of shifted. So just know, like, you don't have to know like word for word like what your thesis is going to be, like your dissertation, but you should have a general umbrella, and that umbrella should relate to the people in the department and how like their expertise could help shape that project. So just general grad advice is making sure that you have at least 2 or 3 professors. Like, I would say more than that, but having at least 2 or 3 professors who could bring in their different backgrounds into your work. Like, I didn't find anyone who was studying the exact thing that I was studying, and I think that's a good thing because it means that it's novel in some way. But I definitely had people who were studying like 20th century American history, labor history, gender, and so I was able to be like, okay, these people together will help shape my project, and that's what they want to hear. Your activity page.
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, turn around.
Okay.
Just click on view your application letter or something like that. No.
Talk about how I actually reacted to getting in. So Brown was actually the first school that got back to me after I applied. So going back to timeline again, I started IRT in the spring of 2021, and it carried me through the end of fall, so that would be December 2021, through the application process. So I was working on my application basically for an entire year, actually writing the materials, and I submitted in late November, so a few weeks before the deadline. And then I heard back from Brown very, very early February. So I was not expecting to hear back that early. I was sort of like, grad applications were out of my mind, they were out into the world, and I was not thinking about, okay, all the things I would have to worry about once I actually got in, because I knew that I just wanted to enjoy my senior year. But I heard back early February. I was in class, I got a notification that my portal has been updated, and I was like, oh no, I didn't get in, because like obviously it's too early. I'm not supposed to hear back until like March or something. But no, I went to my friend, she opened it for me, and immediately I knew that I got in based on her reaction, and I was just overjoyed because honestly, Brown was my first choice. So it was really an ideal situation because my first acceptance was my first choice. So it's really no going downhill from there. And I did end up getting into Penn, and I ended up getting to U of Maryland. So I got a few options, but I knew almost instantaneously that Brown was going to be my choice. And ultimately, the reason is because I did a lot of research. So I knew like the schools that were very good fits. And so when I was considering it, I knew that Brown was in a relatively low cost of living area in comparison to some of the other schools. I knew that they have one of the best stipends in the country, so I wouldn't have to worry about finances as much. Also knew that my advisor, like I would mesh really well with her because of her research, and also just having heard good words about like her advising style from talking to students, current students at Brown. And so a lot of things just sort of went into me realizing that, okay, this is going to be the school that I'm going to thrive at. And as you know, as I'm nearing the end of my first semester, I can definitely say it has been the school for me. And I think it's just a lot of due diligence, and I'm really happy that I took as much time as I did and as much effort as I did and put it into the application, because one, I don't think I would have gotten in if I didn't do all those things, but two, it makes it so much more of a solid decision because I knew that I had really thought about it before I even got an acceptance from any of these schools. So yeah, so if there's any specific questions that I missed in this video, please let me know in the comment section below. I will be happy to do a follow-up video, like some sort of like Q&A maybe if I have enough questions. But I just generally wanted to share sort of like the extended timeline, sort of give a lot of people inspiration if you are looking for people who look like you in this application process, because I know that I was, and just a word of general encouragement that you can do it. Like if you don't have a perfect GPA, if you choose not to do the GRE, if you're a student of color, if you don't have a lot of money, all of the things that I sort of had to grapple with when I was applying, you can still do it. And I did it and it worked out. It takes a lot of work, but it happens.